Hello, creatures, and welcome to tonight's episode of the Slasher Dreams podcast. I'm your host, Ashley, and tonight's episode is sure to be a killer time. I won't keep you waiting. Let's dive right into our first segment, Creature Questions, where I draw 3 random questions sent in by listeners and I answer them. As always, don't worry, if you don't hear your question in this episode, it will still be in the jar, shuffled around, so that there's a chance it gets answered in a future episode. But without further ado, let's get into question number 1. Alrighty, question number 1. What is the best horror moment in a non-horror project? That's a good question. There's a lot of really good horror moments in non-horror projects, all throughout media, whether it's television, novels, comics, movies, video games. There are entire non-horror projects that can still be viewed through a horror-based lens. Like The Truman Show, for example. That is not a horror movie. However, if you watch it in a certain mindset, it could come off as like a psychological horror film. And speaking of psychological horror films, another instance of like not horror but quote-unquote horror moments, I would consider, Robin in the original Teen Titans series going through that psychological horror episode where he's having his PTSD visions of Slade induced by the toxins that were in the Slade mask that he touched. Because, he's seeing Slade. Slade is like an unstoppable force just whooping his ass. And I know that he's kind of like whooping his own ass, but at the end of the day, the way that entire episode is framed is very serious, very uncomfortable, and it feels like a horror moment, especially that moment where Raven is seeing through Robin's eyes, and she's looking around, and then Slade just fucking jump scares her. Like that's a moment that kind of sticks out to me. There are a few others I could think of. There's 2 from the Lord of the Rings series. There's Shelob taking Frodo and chasing Sam around in the tunnels on Mount Doom. There's Frodo falling into the Dead Marshes. Fucking traumatized me as a child. Those are 2 from like a fantasy-based world. I really think those were good instances of like horror moments in non-horror projects. Doc Ock slaughtering everybody in the hospital scene from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2. I think that was Sam Raimi kind of showcasing his horror roots in like a really brilliant way. I really like how that scene is framed. You even have it in like kids movies, like Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Large Marge. We all know how creepy that scene is. Spider-Leg Darth Maul used to creep me out as a kid. I always thought he was fucking terrifying. The Flood from Halo was something that terrified me to play when I was younger. Like that mission kind of fucked with me. Speaking of like alien-based things, like horror moments in non-horror films, like Starship Troopers, the intro of that film is basically like the first like 5 minutes of that movie is like a found footage horror film, where it's like a found footage POV of what happens to Rico and his unit on their first mission, and it's a horrific opening. Like that movie is amazing. If you haven't seen Starship Troopers, I highly recommend that. There's a few more I could think of. The Redeads from Legend of Zelda. Those guys always fucking creeped me out. I was always incredibly uncomfortable every time that I had to play in like an area where they were in. The Professor Pig section of Arkham Knight is creepy as fuck. Like especially towards like the ending section where you're actually fighting like his fucked up little like undead or mutated fucking patients that he's been quote-unquote perfecting. Fucking terrifying. More in line with what we were talking about earlier with The Truman Show, I kind of feel... it might sound a little silly, but I kind of feel unsettled by, like, the Stanley Parable. I know that there's a lot of free choice in that game, quote-unquote free choice in that game, but, like, the way that you go about it, the isolation of your character with nothing but the narrator to kind of guide you or kind of interact with, it kind of creates this uncanny liminal space type feeling for me. And I've always felt incredibly uneasy when it comes to the Stanley Parable. I know it's not like a horror game per se, but it genuinely made me uncomfortable when I used to play it. One of the scenes that really traumatized me as a kid, like this one fucked with me, was Fidget the Bat, his attack at the start of The Great Mouse Detective. Like, that scene where, like, she, like, peeks out of the cupboard and he fucking turns to the camera and he's got that crazy look on his face. Nah, that shit fucked with me. That shit was horrifying. I genuinely... I think I had nightmares about that for, like, months. That scene scared the living hell out of me as a kid. But yeah, those are some relatively... quote-unquote scary / horror moments, or moments I would consider horror moments or horror-like things in non-horror projects. I know stuff like Spider-Leg Darth Maul might seem silly to include, but like that shit was creepy growing up. Like when you're younger, you know, you don't really have that pattern of thinking in your head where you can be like, oh, okay, that's cool. You think you see spider legs and a motherfucker just losing his shit in like a trash heap, and it's creepy. He is creepy in those scenes. Like I can't even. I can watch him nowadays and be fine, but when I was growing up, when I first saw Darth Maul return, I was like, holy shit, that's fucking terrifying. But yeah, let's move on to question number 2. Question number 2 is, what are your horror hot takes? You know, I could probably make like an entire segment out of this, because I seem to have some pretty unpopular opinions when it comes to horror. But I guess since there isn't a segment for that yet, if you guys do want that segment, let me know, and I will figure out a way to make it work in the episodes. But yeah, I think that it would be cool to kind of list off a few. So yeah, I can start relatively small and kind of work my way up to some more hot ones. One that I've kind of talked about commonly is that the potato sack Jason design from Friday the 13th Part 2 is, in my opinion, leagues cooler and leagues scarier than any of the hockey mask looks, save for the hockey mask in the 2009 reboot. But even then, in that movie, there is also a potato sack head Jason that is almost is either as cool or cooler than the original Part 2 Jason with the potato sack on his head. But yeah, I prefer potato sack Jason over hockey mask Jason, which I know is a hot take in the Friday the 13th fandom, I guess. Another unpopular opinion, sticking in the Friday the 13th region, the original Friday the 13th fucking sucks. Like, it is not a good movie. It is pretty much boring up until Pamela shows up in, like, the last 15 minutes. Pamela's pretty much the only entertaining part of that film. Spoilers for when we cover that, of course. But yeah, I do not care for the original Friday the 13th. It is a boring movie that is an absolute drag to get through. The remake is much better, and the funny part of it is it basically discards the entirety of the first film, save for Pamela getting beheaded on the beach. That's about it. And it quite literally just does... It's just quite literally just a better film. The original is just not a good movie, in my opinion. I really just do not like it. Next up, Alice from Part 1 should have had a larger role. As much as I like Ginny, I do think that Alice should have stuck around and been a final girl alongside Ginny in Part 2, and I think Alice and Ginny should have also been the focus in Part 3. I actually have a reboot synopsis I had written on Twitter, where I basically described how I would go about rebooting the timeline and writing it in a different way. And I actually really like that. If you haven't seen it, I could probably pin it on my Twitter profile, and if anybody wants to read it, they can go check it out. Or maybe I can make a video on it. I think that would be cool. People did vote that they wanted me to start making other videos outside of the podcast, which I would love to do. So maybe that could be a video in the future where I go over my outline for how I would redo the Friday the 13th franchise. We can cut it off into sections. I can do like my intro to the franchise with the new timeline. I can do my Jarvis saga and then everything that kind of follows it, and I can kind of clean it up in a way that's nice and make a few videos out of that. So that's something to possibly look forward to in the future. But speaking of Final Girls, we can kind of kick up the temperature on these hot takes. I think Scout Taylor Compton was a better Laurie Strode than Jamie Lee Curtis. I think she had a more interesting take on the character. I think her Laurie has a lot more personality. I also think that I also feel a lot more sympathy towards her Laurie than I tend to for Jamie's Laurie. I think Halloween 2 has its... Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 has its faults, but overall I still like Laurie's arc across both films. I like how Scout performs as Laurie. I think the performance is leagues better than anything Jamie was able to do with the character throughout any of the timelines she was present in. Speaking of Rob Zombie films, another hot take here. Rob Zombie is a great fucking filmmaker. I think he has significantly more hits than he does misses. When you look at his film track record, I think his hits are House of a Thousand Corpses, Halloween, The Devil's Rejects, 31, and his remake of The Munsters, or his take on The Munsters. I know that The Munsters one isn't very popular. It's actually one of his, worst reviewed movies, but I thought it was fun. I thought it was charming. I'm iffy on his Halloween 2. I've kind of changed my mind on it over time, especially as of recent. I still think that the opening segment in the hospital is absolutely phenomenal, and had the rest of the movie been exactly like that, it probably would have been one of the best Halloween movies of all time. But there is just some choices that were made along the rest of the movie's runtime, and there are scenes in it that are really good, like Annie's death scene. Sheriff Brackett finding her is a really emotional scene. Laurie finding her is an emotional scene. There's so much good stuff in the movie that it sucks that there's just so many things that were done with it that I can't seem to vibe with. And that's why I kind of have it in the iffy rather than the miss section. His misses for me are 3 from Hell. I feel like that was just The Devil's Rejects redone, but not as entertaining. And Lords of Salem. Lords of Salem was a movie that I didn't fuck with. And I know it's one of his most artistic films. Last time I watched it, I was 17, and I should probably rewatch it again to see if it's changed for me. But yeah, I haven't seen The Haunted World of El Super Bisto, so I can't speak for if that's a hit or a miss, but out of all those movies, I do think there's more good than bad in his filmography. But that's personally, that's just me. Again, these are just my opinions. That's what hot takes are. They're just unpopular opinions. I think Rob Zombie is an absolute legend in horror, and I think I've actually given this hot take before, last week when I was talking about how I would like to see Rob Zombie put in Dead by Daylight. I am a huge Rob Zombie fan. I like a lot of his movies. I like his music. Yeah, I'm just a huge Rob Zombie guy. But speaking of films that aren't really well liked that I enjoy, here's 2 off the bat for you. We'll stick with Halloween first. Halloween Ends is my favorite Halloween movie. I've talked about that a lot. I've talked about it on Twitter. I've talked about it here. It is my favorite Halloween film. I view that film as absolute perfection. I view that entire trilogy as absolute perfection. And I genuinely just adore that movie with every fiber of my being. I've gone into deep dives on it on Twitter. I've spoken till I was blue in the face about it on live streams back when we did those. I love that movie. It is absolutely brilliant. Yeah, I think that another movie leaving the Halloween sphere that I enjoy that most people in the fandom for this franchise don't like is Jigsaw. I think Jigsaw is a top 3 Saw film. I think that movie is absolutely incredible. I love the character of Logan. I love the movie itself. I think it's a really good movie. I enjoy that movie more than a lot of others, more than a lot of other films in that franchise. And speaking of liking films that are later in the franchise more than other films in the franchise, I like Insidious 3 more than I like Insidious 1 or 2. And Insidious 3 is a pretty unpopular film in the Insidious franchise, to my knowledge at least. Everybody I've talked to about it says it's low in their rankings. They don't like 3, 4, or 5, but they love 1 and 2. And, you know, I think it's kind of unfortunate because I think 3 is probably the most emotionally invested I ever was in the Insidious franchise. Kind of keeping in the same theme of, you know, liking movies that, it's not unpopular to like this movie, but it is unpopular to not like the movie that came before it. I do not like the first Child's Play. I think that movie is mediocre at best. I think Child's Play 2 is where the series really, you know, kind of kicked into gear for me. Child's Play 2 is just a much better film than the first film was. I think Child's Play 2 has a more interesting dynamic between Andy and Chucky. I think Kyle is a much cooler character than anybody that was in the first film. Chucky is like the best he ever was in the franchise. I think Child's Play 2 is the peak of that franchise. And they've had good movies since, but I don't think anything that they've made since or before has ever, you know, lived up to how great that movie is in my eyes. But yeah, we'll do 2 or 3 more. We'll even crank up the heat on them and just do some ones that I know are just like incredibly unpopular. I never see anybody agree with it. I don't think I've ever seen people agree with these. First up, X should have been a standalone film. Pearl and Maxine were not good. They were not good movies. I see everybody always like posting GIFs from Pearl, talking about how much they loved Pearl and Maxine. I did not care for either of those films, so much so to the point where it actually affected how much I enjoy X on rewatches. I did not like those movies whatsoever. Speaking of things that I don't like, I can't fucking stand Randy. I think Randy is one of the worst characters in all of Scream. I think he is a massive piece of shit, and I've gone in on this time and time again. Those of you who have been following me for a long time know that I've talked about this quite a bit. I cannot fucking stand Randy. And as a matter of fact, I think he should have gotten worse in Scream 2. I think he deserved worse. Fuck that guy. But yeah, switching up to 2 things that I really do like. 2 things that I don't see get talked about enough, and 2 things that I've seen people argue whether or not they are horror, which confuses me because I don't see how they couldn't be, given, you know, everything inside of the film, what they're about, and the subtext when you really look at them. I think Skinamarink and I Saw the TV Glow are 2 of the most impactful and scariest horror films of the decade so far. And I know that that's like an incredibly controversial opinion, because a lot of people like to debate whether or not I Saw the TV Glow is even horror, because, you know, it's not horror in the traditional sense. A lot of its scarier, a lot of its scarier feeling is incredibly subtextual, and it can be kind of hard for some people to actually connect with it. But I think it was one of the scariest films and most psychologically impacting films I've watched in a while. It left a very deep impression on me, and it's actually quite heartbreaking too. And Skinamarink is also a very sad film when you really look at the context of what's happening throughout the film, even on the surface level. If you look at that context, it's sad. I mean, kids are, you know, being hunted by something in a house. But when you look at like the subtext of everything going on, it's also incredibly sad. I think they're both 2 incredible films. I know one gets called, you know, not horror because it's not like in your face about what it's trying to say, and the other is called not horror because most people found it boring. I think they're both just 2 really artsy, experimental films that are incredibly complex, and it is just absolutely amazing what they were able to do and how they were able to affect me. I wish more people could have seen it the way I did, because I absolutely adore both of those movies, and I wish there was more people to talk to about how incredible they are, honestly. But yeah, that's about the end of that. On to question number 3. And question number 3 is favorite and least favorite horror trope. I'd have to say that when it comes to tropes, I'm not really sure what things are and aren't tropes, because 9 times out of 10 I'll say, hey, I really like this quote unquote insert thing that something is called, and somebody will be like, oh, that's not that, that's this other thing, that's what you're thinking of, and I'll be like, oh, okay, well, whatever. So if these aren't actually tropes, I apologize. But my favorite trope is the turn around and you would see it trope. It's the kind of moment in a horror film where the killer just kind of hangs in the background of a shot, and if the character just turned around, they would see what's going on. When Michael's in the car he steals from Loomis and Marion Chambers, and he's parked behind, Loomis, and Loomis, if he just turned around, he would see the car there, and he would be able to alert them to where Michael is. Or in The Strangers 2007, 2008, when she's standing there and you see the man in the mask in the darkness in the doorway behind her, and if she just turned around, she would know he's already in the house. It's such a fun trope because it's such an intense way of toying with the audience and making their stomachs kind of turn and feel queasy and give them that uneasy feeling, because it's a very quick way to just rip away any sense of safety the audience is currently feeling with the characters that they've grown attached to, or the characters that they are supposed to be growing attached to. It's such a fun and diabolically evil way of being like, man, the man in the mask is already in the house. At this point, if he really wanted to, he could just kill her. But he hasn't yet, because he's fucked up and he's having fun. And it adds another layer to the killer themselves, because it kind of shows that sick, twisted sense of humor where it's really that mindset they have of, any moment I want, it could happen. But I don't want it to be this moment. I just want to mess around a little bit. And it only adds to a more sinister aura that the character has. A trope that I hate, however, is when no one believes the person that survived the last movie when they say the killer or killing entity has returned. It is such a frustrating trope that is overused. It is obnoxious. It's like, this person, yes, they survived something. Yes, you want them to move on from it and recover. Yes, they've probably had times where in a PTSD-based, hallucination or panic, they have cried wolf when there was no wolf. But if things are seeming fishy, if Tommy hasn't texted back in 10 minutes, and Tommy is a person known to text back in 10 seconds, and they say, I saw the killer attack Tommy, those are 2 instances of something not right. 1, he's acting out of the normal, and 2, they say they saw him attacked. Why are you disregarding them? It's even worse when the main character that's being, disregarded has been prescribed something, and they just start pushing in on if they've taken their medication recently. It is such an annoying and dismissive thing to do to a character that has survived something. And what pisses me off even more is when the character's dismissing the protagonist that's trying to warn them that they are once again in danger, when the characters that are doing that are characters that also survived the last killing spree. We were talking about this earlier. Another reason that I say, fuck you, Randy. And they never actually accept that it's happening again, or see that it's happening again, until people are already, turning up dead. And they could have, prevented that by just spreading the word around more instead of disregarding the character's warnings. There's a ton of movies where this happens. It is such an overused trope. It is obnoxious. If the person says the killer is back, and certain things do feel off, or certain things out of the ordinary are happening, you should fucking listen. Hell, the moment that person says the killer is back, I'd be fucking right by their side the entire fucking time, whether they were actually back or not. Because why would you take the fucking risk? Why would you actively sit there and say, I think you're just being crazy. What the fuck does that do for you? Because if the killer is actually back, you're in danger for disregarding it and not believing them. If they aren't back, you can just be there for your friend in a way that isn't actively dismissing and belittling them and telling them that they're not important enough to trust on something, or that you don't want to quote-unquote indulge in what they're experiencing when you could just support them. I feel that that's just such a shitty thing to do, especially if, as we said earlier, you are also a survivor of the last killing spree from the prior film. It's such an annoying trope. I loathe it with all of my being. It makes me mad. But yeah, that'll end it for creature questions. Thank you for these questions. Next up is Song of the Day. Song of the Day for this week is going to be Umbra by Ghost off their newest album that dropped this year, Skeleton. It's an incredible track. I think it's probably one of the best off of the album, and it's quickly becoming a favorite of mine. For those of you who know me, Ghost is one of my favorite bands. Umbra is just an amazing track. Much like Don't Fear the Reaper, it has a metric fuck ton of cowbell in it, so that's always a bonus. But yeah, the song of the week for this week is Umbra by Ghost. Next up, we have the segment Paths of Doom. Paths of Doom is a segment where we take a damning would you rather asked by you, the audience, and I have to answer the would you rather with no loopholes, tomfoolery, just a straight, honest answer. However, I do not have to walk these paths alone. If you want to join me, you can tag me on Twitter and tell me what path you chose, whether you took the same path as me and we walked together, or whether you left me high and dry and left me alone to most likely die. But yeah, it's just a fun little would you rather segment that allows me to interact with you, the viewers, which is important to me. This week's would you rather is, would you rather be cursed with vampirism or lycanthropy? You see, this is a question that that I have answered before, not on here, but I have answered it before. I would rather be cursed with vampirism because vampires are cooler than werewolves. And I know that's gonna be kind of an unpopular take because I always see people prefer werewolves. I would rather be able to control my actions. There's no guaranteeing what form of vampirism or lycanthropy I'm inflicted with, so I guess it really just depends. But overall, I like my chances more with vampirism. There's just too many forms of lycanthropy where you just become mindless, bloodthirsty, and animalistic. And being a vampire also comes with like a metric fuck ton of super cool abilities depending on what form you get. And even if you don't get like one of the cooler forms, the base vampire powers are still like some of the coolest fucking powers ever. Why would I not want to be a vampire? Also, I think vampires are fucking awesome. I think there's like, if you look through all of fiction, all vampire characters are typically cooler than pretty much any werewolf character. And I'm not even gonna apologize for that, because it's true. Vampires are awesome, and I don't like the sun anyway. But yeah, I would definitely choose vampirism over lycanthropy. I'd rather not run the risk of being completely unable to control my actions. Yeah, there's more ways to kill me as a vampire, but at least I can do more cool shit. I just think vampirism is a cooler and more reasonable option in terms of everything involved. Thank you for that. It was awesome. Alrighty, creatures. The night is nearly over for us, so it's time for our last segment. This is the Slasher Rewind, where we shine a light on a single slasher flick, highlighting my thoughts on the film, spoilers and all, before getting into the story, spoilers and all. Then we choose the kill that was deserving of the final cut, and the kill that was dead on arrival. And then at the end we'll rate the 5 key areas that make a slasher flick tick. Kills, score, protagonist, atmosphere, and of course the slasher of the film themselves, before finally going on to rate the overall film. This episode, I was trying to figure out a movie that was fitting of, of this quote-unquote milestone episode, because we're 5 episodes in here, and I know that 5 isn't a lot of episodes, but I also feel it's important to celebrate the big victories. Consistency is key. So I'm celebrating with my favorite horror film of all time, Scream 1996. Scream 1996 is an incredible movie, my personal favorite of all time, and I know somebody on Twitter the other day was like, are you ever going to cover a movie you don't like? We will cover films that I don't like, but I typically enjoy talking about things that I love more than talking about things that I don't. And that's the kind of positivity that I kind of want to start out with, and we can always move on to films I don't care for in the future. But at least for the beginning of this podcast, I want this to be something that's incredibly fun, and I have my most fun talking about things that I love and things that I'm passionate about. So we will cover movies that are going to get real low scores later on down the line, but at least for the first couple of episodes here, we're going to cover movies that I absolutely adore. Movies that make me happy. Because that's the kind of content I really like putting out. But without further ado, let's get into the final cut. The final cut of the film is Casey Becker. Absolutely, no doubt, one of the most haunting kills in horror history for me. I think the way that she is presented in her death is so brutal and so grotesque. It's not like the goriest thing you've ever seen. It's not like the most innovative kill. It's not the most perfect kill in terms of quality, but I think the impact it has and the build-up and the suspense for it is just absolutely perfect. The opening of Scream 1996 is absolutely legendary in my eyes. Casey is home alone, and she is waiting for her boyfriend, Steve, or Steven. His full name is Steven, but they call him Steve. She's waiting for her boyfriend to show up when she gets a call from the mysterious stranger that we would come to know as Ghostface. She is flirtatious with him at first because his voice is attractive and he's playing, rather flirtatious himself, until he slips up or purposefully slips up to try and make her uncomfortable by saying, I want to know who I'm looking at, when she asks him why he wants to know her name so badly. This sets Casey's alarms off, and she starts hanging up the phone. She starts trying to look around and see if there's anything. Her doors are locked, all this crucial shit to keep herself safe. And whilst she's doing this, she ends up hanging up, and Ghostface calls back. We get the legendary "I'll get you like a fish" line. It's such a great fucking opening to this film. But Casey's death overall is incredibly brutal. She's stabbed multiple times in the chest, multiple times in the stomach, her throat gets slit. All of this is after she gets choked by Billy. We know that it's Billy behind the mask because when you watch the film, Stu likes to play with the knife a little bit and kind of trace it around people. Billy likes to strangle before he kills, and there are little towels that they have throughout the movie that gives you an indication as to which character is supposed to be behind the mask. However, we know that Billy is the one unmasked because Stu is the one that gets hit in the head with the phone. She's also gutted off screen and hung from a tree by Billy and Stu together. You can hear Billy calling out to Stu saying, "Come help me." So we do know Billy is the one that is primarily around Casey, which is another indication that Billy is the one attacking Casey primarily towards the end of this scene and the one that inevitably kills her. But it's a brutal imagery that we see as the aftermath of Casey's murder is showcased to us. It's an incredible opening kill. It's a fantastic opening scene that sets a perfect tone for a perfect movie. It is absolutely incredible. The dead on arrival kill wasn't hard to pick in the idea that there's a bad kill. I think all the kills in this film are pretty good. It's just, I had to try and figure out which kill was, the least good out of them. And in a way that's not it's the worst kill, because all the kills are pretty fun. But with that said, the dead on arrival kill goes to Principal Arthur Himbry. He's stabbed 4 times in the chest and later hung from the goalpost as a distraction to draw attention from the people at the party to the schoolyard trying to see their principal's dead body because apparently everybody that goes to that school is just an absolute fucking asshole. It's not that it's a bad kill, it's just that, you know, it's one of the kills where we don't really get to see anything. We don't get to see much of it. And if you're counting one of the kills in here that I'm not counting, I guess you get to see more of it than that kill, but I'm not really counting it. You'll see what I mean by that here in a second. With that, we will move on to the kills. And this will allow me to explain it. 7 people die in Scream, 8 if you count Maureen, which I personally do not count Maureen Prescott. Maureen Prescott's death happens before the events of the film, but I know some people do like to count her because it is technically an official part of Billy and Stu's killing spree. However, I do not count Maureen. If I did, I don't even know if she would be, you know, the dead on arrival kill. I think it would still be Principal Himbry, because Maureen's death is just way too integral to the plot itself, and while it's not shown at all, I do think its lingering presence over Sidney as a character and over the plot as a whole for basically, you know, the entirety of the first and third film just make it a little too important for it to be given, you know, the title of Dead on Arrival. But yeah, the first kill of the film, technically, if you're not counting Maureen, which, as I said, we're not, is Stephen Orth, a.k.a. Casey's boyfriend. It's a quick kill, it's brutal. Casey is being asked trivia questions that are horror-themed by Ghostface over the phone, and she gets one wrong, and poor Steve is not lucky. He ends up getting gutted by Stu, and it's a pretty violent kill. It's actually the first kill of the movie. A lot of people like to say Casey is, which I believe they kind of just forget about Steve because of how iconic Casey's performance is from Drew Barrymore during, you know, the intro. But Steve is the first kill of the film. Second kill of the movie is Casey. We've already covered her. The third kill of the film is Principal Himbry, so we've already covered him. So we're kind of moving into the end of the film already when we're getting more of the kills. Tatum Riley. Dewey's sister Tatum and Sidney's best friend is a very beloved character within the Scream franchise. She has just like this adoring fan section of stans that just absolutely love her. I like the character a lot. I don't think she was around long enough to really be as impactful as a lot of people say she is. But she is cool for what she gets. But her death is actually kind of sad. Billy does kill Tatum. Billy kills Tatum and Principal Himbry. And Billy has a majority of the kills here in this movie, honestly. Stu does pull his weight, but Billy really does have quite a lot going for him in terms of the kill department here. He ends up slicing Tatum's arm as she goes to get a beer for Stu. Stu kind of tells her to go to the garage and get a beer, and Billy sneaks into the garage and ends up, you know, slicing her over the arm. We get the iconic, "Please, Mr. Ghostface, I want to be in the sequel" line. And then we get Tatum kind of fighting back with beer bottles and different objects within the garage. You kind of get that, the birth of that whole Ghostface is incredibly clumsy stereotype that they kind of applied to the character. And then Tatum tries to escape through the dog door, and sadly she is unable to. Billy presses the button and the garage starts to lift up, and it ends up crushing her from the neck. And it's really kind of unfortunate, because you can totally tell that, like, in some shots that Tatum can very much fit through the door, and the character has to act as if they can't, because, you know, that's what they've got to do. That's how she's written to die. So it does look a little silly when you look at it from that angle. But it's an unfortunate death. It's kind of sad. At the end of the day, Tatum was a really fun character. And, well, I don't think she's nearly as impactful as a lot of people think she was for the film. I can't deny that she is just a really fun character. Next up is another Stu kill. Kind of like the saddest death in the movie for me. Kenny, Gail's cameraman. He gets such a simple throat slash, but Kenny is just a character that's so incredibly kind, and he's barely in the movie, so he's also a character that's not very impactful in the long term. But when it comes to Kenny, he spends the entire movie being, like, verbally abused by Gail. And he still just tries his best to help people, even when he doesn't even fucking know him. Like, he immediately opens the door to go and help Randy when he sees Ghostface is behind him. He realizes the thing's on a loop and he turns around to check, and when he looks back, he gets his throat slashed by Stu in a Ghostface costume. And it's unfortunate, it's sad, and even in his last moments, he's trying to help someone. He ends up pointing to the secondary exit at the back of the van so Sidney can get out of the van instead of being trapped in there with the Ghostface killer right outside. It's super sad, and it's a real shame. He was an absolute unit, an absolute Chad until the bitter end. Next up, we have Stu Macher. One of our killers gets killed at this point in the movie. After the killer reveal, Stu and Billy try to create their alibi by stabbing one another in the stomach multiple times to try and make it look like they were attacked by Sidney's father, who they then overpowered and took down. Billy gets a little stab happy on his turn and ends up kind of fucking Stu over. He's stabbed multiple times in like the chest and stomach area by Billy. Sidney ends up escaping because of a distraction when they realize that Gail has moved and she's not dead. And, they end up knocking her out. But when they go back to look at Sidney, Stu was not paying attention, and Sidney ends up getting out of their line of sight and escaping. He ends up finding Sidney after Sidney attacks Billy, and overall, he chases Sidney down the hall. Overall, he gets a vase bashed into his head after multiple stabs to his body. And while he's dazed and unconscious, Sidney pushes a giant fucking TV onto his skull and just absolutely fucking destroys his ass. If you want to go with the theories that he's not dead, cool. I don't really know what to tell you past. All we know is, as of right now, he's dead. And I know that Scream 6 tried that whole "if you believe he's dead" thing. I think that's just playing into fan theories. I know that Matthew Lillard was on set in Scream 2. I don't think that means anything. I think that's just an actor from the past making a cameo. I've bought into Stu's alive theories before. I used to believe in them. Nowadays, I hope they're not true. I hope that Stu actually was killed. I know that a lot of killers are coming back in Scream 7, which is a controversial movie. There's a lot going on there. I'm not sure. I count Stu as dead as far as Scream 1 is concerned. But as for the flip side of this, the next final kill of the movie is Billy Loomis. Billy Loomis is our other Ghostface, technically our main Ghostface for the film, as he does most of the killing in the movie for the two of them. Billy is also stabbed, I think once or twice, by Stu during that section. He fucks over Stu a lot more than Stu fucks him over in that exchange. Once again, they end up hearing Gail come in. She has the gun trained on them. They get distracted, but Billy knows that the safety isn't off, and he ends up knocking her out. And as he goes to kill her, Stu points out that Sidney is missing, and Billy gets pissed and he leaves her alive, his first mistake. And then they search for her, they search for Sidney, and Billy is attacked by Sidney wearing a Ghostface costume when she rams an umbrella into his chest. Fun fact, that umbrella actually stabbed actor Skeet Ulrich, so in that scene, his scream is like authentic. He is an actual pain in that moment. It is incredibly brutal. It's even more brutal when you know that actually happened. Then Stu chases Sidney down. We get Stu's death. One thing leads to another, and Billy resumes his attack of Sidney, strangling her. And he is shot multiple times in the chest by a Gale Weathers who has regained consciousness. And Sidney, Gale, and Randy stand over Billy's body, and Randy warns, he's like, this is when the supposedly dead killer comes back for one last scare. And as Billy tries to sit up, Sidney just shoots him right in the face and says, the iconic, "not in my movie." Overall, I would say Billy's death is incredibly cool. I think he's an incredibly awesome character. Billy Loomis is one of my favorite characters in all of fiction. I absolutely adore him. I think he's my favorite Ghostface of all time. And I think he has a really cool death to kind of end it off. But yeah, when it comes to the kills for Scream are just an absolute 5 out of 5. The Casey Becker death alone has enough iconicness and absolute brutality to it to kind of skyrocket the overall score itself. But then you have characters like Stu and Billy who are just covered in blood. Some of it fake, some of it real. You have Tatum's death, which is violent and iconic. You have the throat slash from Kenny, which is quick, and the pseudo off-screen kill of the principal, which are kind of, two things that almost drag it down a little, but I still think the kills in this movie are just amazing. They all set up the tension so well. They speak to the personality of the people killing in each scene. I think it's absolutely incredible how they went about the kills in this film. The score is kind of a different story for me. Red Right Hand is an absolute banger, but they have this really shitty cover of Don't Fear the Reaper in this movie, and if you know me, you know that that's my favorite song of all time. So that kind of drags the score down a little bit for me. And the Scream theme overall is really good. I don't think it's talked about enough when it comes to iconic horror themes. I actually hear people quite frequently say, wait, Scream has a theme? And it bugs me because it's like, yes, they have a fucking theme. It's really fucking good. I would suggest you listen to it if you don't recall what it is off the top of your head, because it's actually kind of amazing and it fits the movies really well. But with that awful cover of my favorite song and just general lack of other songs on the track that I really enjoy, I would say that the overall score is a 3 out of 5. And that is primarily just because Red Right Hand is just such a good fucking song. When it comes to the atmosphere of the movie, the atmosphere of Scream 1996 is, in my opinion, the best in the franchise. I think 5 got really close, and I think 6 went back and forth between reaching that level and kind of drooping back down below it. But in my opinion, 1996 remains unmatched. It's just an incredible movie. You feel this haunting, lingering presence of Ghostface no matter where he is. His presence is just constantly looming. No pun intended. This movie overall is just incredible. You really feel everything. The sets that they have and the settings that they are filming in, they just add to everything. It's impossible for me to explain just how much I love the atmosphere of this movie. Every time there's a phone call, the mood instantly shifts, regardless of if it's another character that we know calling to talk to a character, or if it's Ghostface. When it comes to a Scream movie, a phone call, something as simple as a phone call, regardless of who's on the other end of the line, is just an uncomfortable feeling because we've learned to associate that call with Ghostface, and it just adds this subtlety to it that's just chef's kiss. Absolutely perfect. The atmosphere of this movie is incredible. Absolutely phenomenal. The scene where Sydney wakes up from her nap and is like fucking chased by Stu around her house, but that whole build up to it beforehand with the phone call is just so masterfully done. It's just so absolutely incredible. And even after the killers are revealed, that feeling doesn't go away. It actually gets worse because you really get to see Matthew Lillard and Skeet Ulrich just go completely unhinged with their performances as these characters. It's a complete 180 from the front that they put on, and it's done in such a perfect way. The atmosphere of this movie is just absolutely perfect, and it's aided by the characters, by the setting, by everything. It's incredible. It is 100% a 5 out of 5. And that's before we get into the protagonist. Sidney Prescott is one of the greatest final girls of all time. And while I do wish that they would veer away from her story, I really liked that 5 was going to focus on new characters, and then they brought her back for that movie, which I was okay with, because I think that the way that it ended in Scream 5 was a perfect send-off for her. But I really liked that in 6 they kind of fully moved away from her, and I'm really, really pissed off with how Scream 7 has gone in terms of things. But Sidney Prescott herself is still the legend she ever was. Like, she is an absolute badass. Her fight with Stu during that first chase in her house, before Billy comes up and he drops his phone and she gets suspicious and he gets arrested. Her fighting back was just so cool to see. She's such a badass. And I love how she is even aware that what she's doing isn't the right call, but she still tries to do the thing she said she was going to do prior. She still tries to go out the front door before she goes up the steps. But she does end up going up the steps, which kind of shows the meta self-awareness that Scream is known for. It's a brilliant scene. But then you have her just absolutely juking the guy in the bathroom, who I don't think was Billy or Stu. I think it was just a prankster. That whole scene is kind of off for me. But then you have, at the party, her putting on the Ghostface costume and just jamming that umbrella into Billy's chest. Her taking down Stu. Her absolute badass, just not fucking around, not taking any chances headshot of Billy Loomis. I think Neve Campbell portrays her in such an incredible way, and you really get to see that shift from the start prior to the spree, where she already has some incredibly emotional issues because of her mother's murder. You really get to see Neve kind of shift in terms of how she portrays Sidney, when she already had a complex character to start with based off the emotions Sidney would be feeling, and she has to somehow take that and shift it into something more corrupted by the events of the film itself. We get to see her go from emotionally traumatized from the death of her mother to emotionally, mentally, and physically traumatized throughout the course of the film. She becomes more jagged, she becomes more paranoid, more distrusting. And this is from a character that was already kind of feeling uncomfortable and uneasy around people. And I think the way Neve portrays it is just absolutely incredible. I think Sidney Prescott is probably... She's always been in my top 3 for Final Girls, but as I said in the Terrifier video, Sienna likes battling for first spot, and more often than not, she is battling with Sidney Prescott. Sidney Prescott is a 5 out of 5 protagonist. But now it's time to rate our killers. We'll start with Stu. Stu is incredible. Stu is unhinged, psychotic. He's completely out of his fucking mind, and Matthew Lillard's over-the-top performance sells that in a way that is so incredibly captivating, and it magnetizes you towards Stu as a character, where even though he's the killer, you still can't stop liking him. Matthew Lillard is just an incredibly likable person. And Stu is no different. Stu is sinister and sick, and I love that there's a more complex story behind things, where if you look at the subtleties, you can really start to piece together maybe reasons as to why Stu is the way he is. Like, he seems to feel incredible pressure. I know that the peer pressure thing is just his excuse, but I think there is something to that. I think he is Billy's lapdog in terms of how things go. He's just the meathead muscle that Billy got, and we hear Roman say he told Billy to get a fall guy, somebody who can take the fall if anything goes wrong. And I think Stu actively thought he was a part of this. I don't think he ever realized what he really was to Billy. And I think there's some complexities in there, because you can see notes on the fridge from Stu's parents. His parents clearly aren't around much, and the way he talks about them is like they put a lot of pressure on him. So you can see certain issues there. You can see in his attic. His attic's creepy as fuck. I mean, there's clearly something wrong with him prior to anything that's going on in the film. And Stu is just such an interesting character when you look at the subtleties in the storytelling around him. Overall, Stu is just absolutely perfect. I think he's a 5 out of 5. But Billy Loomis is quite literally my favorite slasher of all time. My favorite ghost face of all time. I don't know what it is about him that draws me to him so intensely. But he's just perfect in every way. He looks cool. He acts cool. Everything he does is just so fucking brutal. It's the way he talks in the scene where they've revealed themselves is so calm and collected with a subtle ominous undertone, and then when he does get angry and he does get rageful, it's intimidating. His hair is fucking awesome. I absolutely fucking love the look they went for in the movie. His kill method is really fucking sinister, and I'm stumbling over my fucking words here because I can't put into words just how much I absolutely love Billy Loomis as a character. The complexity of his backstory with his mother leaving, and the saga that kind of create the duology saga that kind of creates with him being a ghost face and then Mrs. Loomis being the ghost face in Scream 2. The way that he portrays just how broken in terms of how his family is, that he really is. It's so good. Billy is such an interesting character. He's such an amazing character. Skeet Ulrich's performance is absolutely fantastic. Billy is also a 5 out of 5, bringing the slasher category to a 5 out of 5. I could go on 4 hours, but I don't think I should. I'm already stumbling because I love this film so much I can barely fucking focus. But yeah, when it comes to Scream overall, Scream is an absolute 10 out of 10. The perfect horror film. My perfect horror film. My favorite horror film. I couldn't be more happy to cover such a fantastic movie. Wes Craven's mind when he made this was just in this absolute flow state. I can just tell. Everything fits together beautifully. Everything is just done perfectly. It's just absolutely mind-blowing. I love the movie. I love the characters. I love the legacy that it created. I wish the legacy wasn't being treated how it is nowadays, but everything that followed was just as perfect to me up until recently. Scream was my life for the longest time. It was the movie I watched that reintroduced me to horror in a different light than I had seen it in. I talked about that last episode, or the episode before that, I can't remember. Scream is perfect to me. Scream is my everything. I've dressed as Ghostface. I've cosplayed as Ghostface. I own multiple Ghostface suits, multiple different types of suits, multiple different types of masks. I main him in Dead by Daylight. I have all of the Dead by Daylight outfits for Danny Johnson's Ghostface. I have so much Scream shit. It's not even funny. I literally have a Scream action figure over here on my shelf in my office that sits there, and I look at it every time. I'm looking for a little bit of spooky motivation to really get my brain flowing for you know, what I want to talk about in these episodes and ideas that I have for videos. Scream is my driving force when it comes to horror. It started the car, it pushed the pedal to the floor, and I've fallen in love with horror to the extent that I have because of it. And for that, Scream will always have my heart and my soul in like a fucking chokehold. I don't think I could ever fully walk away from it. It's brilliant, it's beautiful, it's an absolute scream. Creatures, it looks like our night has come to a close. This is your host, Ashley, reminding you to be kind, rewind, and keep an ear out for all things that go bump in the night. Until next time.